what about Hitler? How do Christians deal with that level of violence?
Today it's a common question, the one that has just been asked. What would you do with Hitler? What do you do about Hitler? And I suppose it's a reasonable question at one level of examining this whole problem. And I suppose it's reasonable because Hitler is kind of a paradigm of what it means to be a violent and evil person in the minds of most people who live in the latter half of the 20th century in Western civilization. But Hitler is not unique. Hitler indeed engaged in war and destroyed millions of people. But so did Roosevelt. So did Churchill. So did Napoleon. So did the Tsars. So did Genghis Khan. So did Mao Zedong. So did Menachem Begin. How many millions over the centuries have Christians killed and destroyed? Of their own, of Jews, of other non-Christians, Muslims? How many Muslims have killed and destroyed how many Christians and other? Non-Christians. You see, since 1945, outside of Jesus Christ, it is said that no one has been written about more than Adolf Hitler. That's an interesting reality in light of some pieces of reality that we don't sometimes talk about. Adolf Hitler was like you and I. When he walked, he probably took a step that was about 18 inches or so long. When he reached out his hand, he probably reached out about 3 feet. If he snapped his finger, it could probably be heard maybe 20, 25 feet. When he spoke at the top of his voice, maybe he could be heard for 200 or 300 feet. That's all. He was like you, like me. There's no difference between us. Very limited, very finite person. So why do we say continually, what about Hitler? What would you do with Hitler? You see, what has taken place is that Hitler has become a scapegoat, a symbol that people actually stop looking at as a symbol and begin to believe is the total reality of something that is terrible in the human psyche, and especially in the psyche of Western civilization. That is, people fixate on the individual when the individual, Hitler, is no more powerful and perhaps a lot less powerful physically than I am or you are. He can only reach out 3 feet. He can only walk 18 inches at a step. But he has become a symbol. He has become a symbol because his spirit reaches well beyond 3 feet and 18 inches. His spirit reached into the heart and into the soul and into the mind and into the emotions of millions upon tens of millions of other human beings. And they lived in it and they took it in and they were full of its life. And it's truth. And they would do anything for it because it was their God. Anything. They would die for it. They would kill for the Führer. Country. People in the Führer. You see, Hitler alone probably can pick up 85 pounds. His voice reaches 200 feet, 300 feet, etc., etc. But Hitler, where tens upon tens of millions of others agree to become an extension of his spirit, Hitler becomes an enormous power, an extraordinary power, where human beings become the extensions of the body of Hitler because they live in the spirit of Hitler. Where human beings become the extension of the body of Caesar because they live in the spirit of Caesar. Where human beings become the extension of the body of little Napoleon because they live in the spirit of little Napoleon. Where human beings become the extension of the body of Hirohito or Mao Zedong because they live in the spirit of Hirohito or Mao Zedong. Where human beings become the extension of the body of Churchill or Truman because they live in the spirit of Churchill and Truman. That's how Hitler and Churchill and Truman and Hirohito and Mao Zedong and Napoleon and Caesar and Genghis Khan all acquire their power. They're only human beings, lumps of clay, dust with a few years to live, probably not capable of picking up their own weight. But the power that they receive is because other members of the human race agree to enter into their spirit, to become extension of their minds and their hearts, and therefore extensions of their body. They agree to turn their wills over to them. In the spirit of Roosevelt, in the spirit of Mao Zedong, in the spirit of Hirohito, in the spirit of Napoleon, in the spirit of Caesar, are not the spirit of Jesus Christ, is to say the obvious. It has become clouded. Because since the time of the emperor, the Caesar Constantine, Christians have been saying, nation after nation, culture after culture, that the spirit of the local political, when that spirit has been a spirit of violence and homicide and war and greed and power and prestige and prerogative, that spirit is in fact the spirit of Jesus Christ. The Catholic bishops in Germany during the Second World War told the Catholic population that it was their Christian duty to follow Hitler. And that's fact. Lutheran Church did the same. And for the last 1,700 years, nation after nation, culture after culture, Christians at all positions in the church have found it more than acceptable. Turn their spirit over to the spirit of the local king or dictator or president or whatever it may be. Power politician is what it is. Call it the spirit of Jesus. live and promote the lie that this spirit is in conformity with the Spirit of Jesus. Let us be clear. Without this massive betrayal of the Spirit of Jesus, the mind of Jesus, and the heart of Jesus, without this grotesque manipulation of the gospel that made living in the spirit of the local political power structure consistent with living in the Spirit of Jesus Christ, there could not have been any Nazi Germany. There could not have been any imperialist Russia. There could not have been a United States that is the greatest arms exporter in the history of the world. There could not have been any Christian slaughter of Christians in Central America, in Ireland, in Germany, in Yugoslavia, etc., etc. There is a fundamental betrayal of the gospel that takes place when the spirit of a power politician is made consistent with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. If Christians had refused the spirit of Hitler and of Truman and of Napoleon and of the Tsar, if Christians had refused that spirit for the last 1,700 years, that Constantinian spirit, then Napoleon or Hitler or Truman or the Tsar would have been able to reach out 3 feet, walk 18 inches. And the Christian church, Christians, would have been living then in the spirit, in the mind, in the heart of Jesus Christ, and therefore would have been the body of Jesus Christ, instead of being the body of Hitler, the body of the Tsar, the body of Caesar, the body of Truman. We simply must be very, very clear. When a human being is engaged in war, and he is tearing someone apart with a dagger, or blowing someone's head off with a machine gun, or burning someone's face off with a flamethrower, when those actual events of war take place, that take place by the billions and trillions, it makes no difference whether the person is a Nazi or a Christian, a Muslim or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Hindu, atheist, a communist, a capitalist. It makes no difference. For there is a universal spirit that governs homicide and war. And it's the spirit of Satan. War is a sociological term that talks about huge numbers, thousands of millions dead, and battles here or there. Sociology is an abstraction. The concrete is the actual moment when someone tears someone else's face out, kicks someone in the groin, slits some mother's son's throat, and the blood pours out over him, over the dying person. That's war. And at that moment when the dagger is stuck in the kidney, in the fury of homicidal violence, who cares about Jesus or Allah or Yahweh or Buddha? The spirit is exactly the same. Vicious, hostile, grim. It's the spirit of terror and fear and hate and revenge and enmity. Hitler, and those like him, all the Caesars, to use the rather generic term that we use for this, represent that spirit. What the Christian is to do in the face of that spirit, the spirit of Caesar, the spirit of Hitler, the satanic spirit, the Christian is to say no to it, as Jesus said no to it. Pilate, Herod, and when that spirit took over Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane. The fact of the matter is, there is a choice. One understands that there is a logic to the violence of Hitler, to the violence of Nazism, to the violence of Truman, to the violence of Napoleon, to the violence of the Tsar, to the violence of Hirohito, etc., to all the Caesars. There is a logic to it. It is the logic of the kingdoms of this world. But there is another logic, as St. Paul communicates to us, that is illogical to the kingdoms of the world. Is the logic of the way of Jesus Christ. That logic says that one loves as Christ loves. Lets the power of God then flow through him and through her. And if necessary, dies as Christ dies. But it is absolutely clear that one does not substitute the mind and the heart and the soul and the spirit of Caesar. The mind, heart, soul, and spirit of Jesus, and thereby become the body of Caesar instead of becoming the body of Christ. Die we might, die we must. But it's how we live and how we die. The great issue. There is a real choice. And that choice is whether to be little Caesars or to be little Christ. It is an absolute betrayal. Everything that is holy and good of the gospel to say that to be a little Caesar is the same thing as being little Christ. They are diametrically opposed spirits, hostile spirits, as actually lived in the moment. One is the spirit of Satan. The other